I just finished your book for the third time, Inheritance with a High Error Rate, which won the 2022 Cider Press book review. And terrific book, absolutely terrific. So I'm going to be asking you to read several poems, quite a few, and we're going to talk about them. So first of all, how did you come to this title?
Oh, well, first, let me thank you, not only for reading it, but reading it 3 times, which is really nice of you, and for the compliment, and for this interview, which is also really nice of you to ask me to do. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I've known you for so long, and this is just a joy. The title refers to a certain kind of way we talk about mangoes. And this book was written over, a lot of the poems were written over the 20 years that I lived and worked on the last acre of a historic mango grove. A lot of that mango grove was cut down to make the suburban village known as Miami Shores. But I had the last acre of it, and we lived in the mango picker's cottage. So we had 14 mango trees, and half the year we were mango farmers, essentially. And inheritance with a high error rate means that mangoes can't be planted from their pits or their seeds, because they will revert back to all of their wild traits. And you don't really know what kind of mango you will get, or if you will get a mango at all. A pit can be sterile. So they have a lot of error rate in them. So most mangoes that you see on the market, and this is true for a lot of fruit trees, they're grafted to ensure that what you plant is what you think you're getting. And if you plant from the pit, you may not get anything at all, or you may get something that you totally didn't anticipate. It could be a better mango, it could be terrible. And I use this also as a metaphor for my own genes, because I come from a family that has an incredible array of autoimmune and autoinflammatory diseases. And I happen to inherit like 4 or 5 of them. My brother inherited 5 or so, and he passed away. So he's featured in the book a lot. He passed away while he was estranged from me. So there's a lot of dealing with that estrangement as well. So it's a metaphor, but it's also a reality that fruit farmers understand.
Wow, that's good to know because I have 5 mango trees growing. One of them is pretty big that grew from the pits of my mango tree. One of them already did produce fruit. It's like already 25 feet tall now. And that one did produce fruit that wasn't as good as the original tree, but I have 4 others that are growing from pits. They're small. I do not intend to keep those because I just have a normal little backyard. But I do love mangoes also. And I really identify with a lot of your poems in there. So I'm just going to kind of go in order because it's just the way I wrote things down.
Okay.
So I seem to be missing a page. That's okay. The first one is I commiserate with the pygmy octopus found in the Miami Beach parking garage. And I have to ask you, did you really see that or did you just read about it?
I just read about it. I mean, I think if
I do that.
I probably would have done something about it. I mean, I hope I would have done something about it. But this was a news article in the Miami Herald. And I think that at the time that I had read that, it was kind of a shock. Because again, a lot of these poems were written a long time ago. During that time on that mango grove, I had not done this deliberately, but I would take a picture of the first mango of the season every year. So Facebook keeps reminding me that I've taken these pictures every year of the first mango of the season. And looking back, I can see how the climate changed over the years and how the season would get later and later and later. And this was one of the first poems that I wrote. And I put it in the book as the first page because it really represented a lot of the climate change that we were seeing and starting to happen in Miami. And, you know, everybody always tells us we're the face of climate change. It's not really true. There are a lot of islands around the world that are the face of climate change, as well as, you know, any low-lying area. But that's what happened with this kind of poem.
I used to love to eat octopus, but after watching my octopus teacher,
Oh my God. I know.
Isn't that amazing? I could no longer eat octopus. I just didn't realize they were sentient beings. So anyway, let's read that poem.
Okay, great. This is actually one of my favorites too. So I commiserate the pygmy octopus found in the Miami Beach parking garage. First time, I get it. In this place, it's inevitable to cling to cement like forgotten spaghetti in the bottom of the pot. Bottom dwellers, holders of the smallest hopes, we have so much in common. Always, it's a rude awakening to find yourself flush on the floor under the neon glare of a super beaver moon, the surging sea and near distance, that uterine shed of toxic algae, the sick room stink sweeping in long before the scarlet feathered dawn, pushing you into a place you never thought you'd go. All three of your hearts were born to know what dying is, but this is different. Only air beats through your gills to replace their copper charges. Canary in the coal mine of climate change, marine biologists call you. Expect more sea creatures in dry spaces. Twitter sends recipes, sarcasm. This is from the city that brought the world a shark on the metro rail. Is it running for mayor? Harbinger or hoax, but alive when security scoops you into a bucket of salt water and deposits you home. The question is not how long can you survive out of the ocean, but why should we have to see your blood to know how much bluer it runs?
That was an interesting fact that I had not known before about octopuses, is that they have octopuses, that they have blue blood. That's really interesting.
Yeah, they have blue blood, that they have 3 hearts. So I didn't know that either until I started researching them. And there are a couple of poems about octopuses in this book. I was teaching at the time, and we were watching one of my assignments to my students. I taught creative writing to 6th through 12th grade for 9 years. And one of my assignments to my students was to find a YouTube video and write a poem about it. And they were obsessed with watching octopus. So we learned a lot of, I wasn't letting them watch like YouTubers do stunts or anything like that. It was like they had to watch a nature YouTube something. So they were like obsessed with octopus. Octopus are fascinating.
They are. They really are, especially the way they move and their eyes look around. They really are. I mean, I like cows too, but I eat them. So, but I don't know. After that documentary, I just have trouble eating an octopus.
There are so many documentaries that I will not watch, so that my other career as a food journalist, I can still eat things.
Right. Yeah, you're still doing that, right?
I'm still doing some of it. I have a guidebook that I have to keep up with, but for a large degree, food writing has been replaced by AI.
Yes, everything's being replaced by AI, except the poetry it produces is still absolutely horrendous.
Yeah,
I've experimented with it.
I get some queries every now and then if I want to help AI people make their poetry better. And I always say no, because why would I want to replace myself?
Right. Yeah, I asked it to analyze some of my poems once, and it did this terrific analysis. But when I really looked at what it said, they weren't my poems. They were my titles, but they were not my poems.
That's
Because at the end, it showed the poems. They were absolutely horrendous, rhymed little ditties that were just terrible. So I actually wrote to Microsoft and asked them, how could this happen? Because I had used the Microsoft AI then, and it said, oh, sorry, we're still learning. And that's all they wrote me.
yeah.
So, yeah, it was
Well,
terrible.
apparently you can ask it if it's making it up, and it will tell you yes.
Yes, and
And
yes, it will. Yeah,
but we all
because
know that
teaching,
yeah.
I'm back to teaching again, and the students are using AI like crazy. I would say half my students are now getting zeros and having to rewrite their papers in front of me because they're using it.
Yeah.
So, to go back, um, on page 7, so you can look it up, the gee whiz element of tropical storms and symphonies. I chose that one, and given that we just had a tropical storm in Florida, Miami, and of course a hurricane in the Panhandle. Lucky we are again. So let's have you read that one, and we'll talk about it.
Okay. This one I wrote when we were being threatened by Irma. So this is the gee whiz element is actually a scientific thing that happened to Tampa Bay, where the bay ahead of the storm completely emptied out. So
Yes.
you'll hear about that in the
Saw a picture of that.
right.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you don't get to experience these themselves, but we can read about it and see the pictures. Fascinating. It was fascinating. The gee whiz element of tropical storms and symphonies. During the opening of the hurricane, the water drains, a rapid decrescendo from the shoreline. As silent as sand, we gather dinner, our nets replete with those flounder neat before the coming movement, caught on a shard of harbor, as if on the ego of a king. We explore with a microburst of confidence, gusting as hard as the earth's last heated, swollen breaths. But this lazy adagio will not hold, written to return like a horn section to capo da capo. If we're lucky, we will escape before the poor accelerato, before the thunder so tympanic we're held captive and captivated, spectator and spectered, carried away on a diaphragmatic surge to a horizon that we can't see and are able, despite such fine-tuned percussion, to deny how this ending could be so.
Interesting how you meld the musical elements. So talk about that.
Well, I actually wrote this poem when I was about to teach Piano Slam. I don't really know if you know what Piano Slam is. It's a program that combines two duet classical pianos, and they always do an original composition with spoken word for 6th through 12th graders. And the students write poems, send them in. It's a competition. And they choose 15 students from like 3,000 or 4,000 submissions. And they perform at the Arts Center. It's a formal production. They rehearse with a modern ballet troupe and this classical music, and then a hip hop DJ. And they put it all together with the kids doing spoken word. And it's a really, really cool performance. And the kids also win like computers and money. And it's a great way, especially my students they were disadvantaged students. So it was a great way for them to write a poem to an assignment and a prompt, learn about something, because there's a STEM element that they have to use, which is science. And they have to use music, learn about music, and then also maybe win a prize, get to perform at the Arts Center, and gain some confidence in their speaking.
That's amazing. I'd never heard of that.
Yeah,
And
and
so
I still
I can
participate
see.
in that every year, even though I'm not formally teaching anymore. Now I teach the teachers. I do the teacher workshop, and I also go into the classrooms as a visiting poet, which is really fun. I enjoy that. So Piano Slam is a great, it's a great program. It's been around for about, I don't know, 15 or 20 years in Miami. So I wrote that poem as an example for the teachers about
Oh,
it was a
okay. But that
for the students, I think, because the science was a little difficult for them to understand, the sixth graders at least.
well, the poem would have them looking up words, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
you have to use music.
which brings me,
So, but I
yeah,
did grow up as a musician, so this was for me using the musical terms that I already knew them. And you know, I kind of miss playing in orchestras and I miss playing in concert bands, but there's not that much opportunity for an adult such as myself to do that in, you know, in your
this
regular.
is fascinating. The most fascinating thing about you, besides your fantastic poetry, is how many different things you do. I'm always in awe when I read something new on Facebook or somewhere else or in person about the things that you do. It just, you are quite the accomplished lady. I
Oh,
got to tell you, I'm just in awe. Okay, which goes to, let's read the title poem, Mango, an Inheritance with a High Arrow Beat.
okay, so this, do you remember what page that is? I should know.
22.
22. This one, you'll hear about all of the different things you can do with mangoes. Mango, an inheritance with a high error rate. The slick gush of you, the stain and stick of you. How you fill cheeks like the residue of a tongue bitten nearly in two. The way you linger in the air with the fleetest of flies no one can catch except with leftover wine, rotting in wide-mouthed glasses along with the lead point of bodies I collect like coins until the liquid chokes with them. This is about how I've loved you for so long, I've grown weary of you. Fragrant wild grenades percussing through the night onto the shards of the pool deck, pinging off drain pipes and catching in gutters, splattering the slats of the solar panels with such force that I sleep dreaming of ancestral dangers. And all the abundance you beget, the family members who clamor for you and bring back breads and chutneys and salsas made too saccharine with you, dishes to spoil in the back of the refrigerator, and your pits that root themselves in oolite and silt from squirrel-gnawed fruit, thrusting up seedlings when no one is looking that might or might not bear if allowed to grow, but will be considered new varieties if you do. Those genes throwbacks to every Asian, Latin, and Caribbean tree that contributed to your lineages. And those who will name you, guess again, rename you. And the food pantries that won't take you, even though you are fresh, unprocessed, because this is no longer how America embraces anything in your colorful, foreign-born skins.
You know what, really, besides the remembrance of hearing the mangoes fall onto my flat roof, which is my bedroom,
Yeah.
my bedroom roof is flat. So during the night, boom, boom, boom. And then the patter of feet, which could be anything, squirrel, possum, raccoon, whatever, that's on top of my roof also. So I really could identify with that. But the ending of that poem, how you wove in politics, that, oh, I got goosebumps once again. That knocked me out. And I get goosebumps when something really like wows me. And even, you know, second or third time, I just got them again. Fantastic how you did that.
Thank you.
Really.
It's,
Yeah.
it's interesting how mangoes are like people sometimes. They're not, they're migrants here too.
Right. And all the different varieties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love that. Love that. Paige, you do that a lot in your poems. You go in directions that you start off with one thing and wind up in another direction. It takes you to places that you didn't really expect. Another example is the poem Flight Plan on page 27.
Right.
That one also just wowed me at the end.
This one I wrote for my friend Jennifer Hull, who is one of my first real acquaintances in Miami. We were in a group of women journalists together called Women on the Verge, and we would meet, I think, once a month. There were quite a few of us female journalists, and about 4 of us got pregnant at around the same time, and we formed a split off baby group from there. And the other female journalists were like, "Oh, we're not drinking the water. What's going on?" Because they were like, "We don't."
That does happen with
Yeah,
women.
but some of them were
Yeah.
dedicated, like non mothers, which I respect. Like, we all make our own choices. So they were like, "Oops, stay away."
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. It's catching. I don't want to catch it.
Sketching. So Jennifer sadly wound up taking her own life a few years ago, and I wrote this for her to read at her celebration of life. But this was a day that we spent together when she was feeling well before that. And that's probably why it went in directions that you didn't expect, because you wouldn't know the background of that, but there's a lot of those poems in there. When you get to your midlife, people do start disappearing on you in ways that you don't expect.
Yes, yeah, that has happened. Form is, we're not going to read them. There are so many to read. Form is something that you like to use. You play with form a lot, and you invent forms that I never heard of because you invented them. So I'm reading through these and I'm trying to think, what form is that? It's a different, I don't recognize that one. And it's because you invented it. In fact, I even copied your form, The American Sentence, and wrote several poems from that because that one fascinated me. And there's The Evaporating Villanelle. I love the title of that, the form. And I love the one in the book that there's a couple that do that. So on page 6, so you can look it up, Evaporating Villanelle for Algae Bloom.
Right.
Read that and tell us about the form and how you came to that.
Okay. I'll read it first and then I'll explain a little bit.
Yeah.
Evaporating Villanelle for Algae Bloom. We all have secrets we would like to keep to ourselves. Sure, the sea is no different. The whole grave mass of it could cover up oil spills, plastics, but they spike into shape, those hourglass whirls to see in the distance. We all have secrets we would like to keep, but still resuscitate. Regrets lewd, a sour bite that shows up for tea. The whole grave mass of it could foul the interstitial brood with its vast swirl, its Milky Way. We all have secrets we would label scarlet tide or sea snot, endless whirl of dishonor. The whole grave mass of it we fail to save with mere skimmers. This whole grave we all have.
I wish people could see the poem. I'm just going to have to buy your book and look it up. Oh, yeah. The way it looks is just amazing.
So it does.
So talk about it.
It disappears down the page, but it disappears in rhyming fashion. This is not the first Evaporating Villanelle that I wrote. So I've been refining the form as I've gone on. The first one is in the back of the book, I believe. More, yeah. The first one I wrote is called Evaporating Villanelle for Emotion Number 2. And that one is about grief. Grief is called emotion number 2. I don't know why it's the number 2 emotion. I guess joy is the first emotion. I don't know. There's a chart.
Really, I'd never heard that.
I don't remember why I looked that up.
Yeah.
But I did. This was also a plastic poem. So emotion number 2 by Walter Brown. So there was a chart somewhere too that I looked it up, and I can't remember what emotion number 1 is, but I think it's joy. I'd have to check on that. Don't take my word for it. But that was the first one I wrote. And then I do have several others that were originally in the book. And then several readers told me to take them out, that they weren't as strong. And I was like, finally I listened. And then after I listened to them, the book got the award. So I was like, I guess you were right.
Yeah. Well, you'll never know.
But as I've been refining the form, I have 3 points in the first. It starts off like a regular villanelle, but I have 3 points in the first 2 rhyming lines of the first and third line that rhyme. So we all have secrets we would like to keep, and then the whole grave mass of it could cover up. As the second stanza comes into play, it rhymes in 3 different places. So as it starts to disappear, it keeps the rhyme. So it's kind of a difficult form to write, because you're trying to internally rhyme within the line, so that as you break it off, you're still keeping the rhyme.
Right.
So it's not.
And you use rhyme in a beautiful way. Yeah.
I love to use rhyme.
Slant rhyme, off rhyme.
Yeah.
Assonantal rhyme, consonantal rhyme. So many different kinds and ways to rhyme. And your rhyme doesn't hit you over the head with the hammer. So I just really enjoyed discovering it throughout the poem.
Oh, thank you. I do love to use rhyme. I like to wreathe and unwreathe things, so that there's, some, and you don't notice it because you're not supposed to, really. To me, I think that also comes from my music background. There's a lot of repetitive, when people compose music, there's a lot of repetitive notes and strains and measures that come into play that you don't notice, but it hooks you into a song. So when you listen to a song, that's what a chorus is, obviously, but even in classical music, there's a lot of repetitive work that you're not noticing, but is hooking your brain. And that's why you like to listen to it again. And I like to do the craft of a poem, so that you're like, oh, I really like that. Maybe I don't know why I like the sound of it, but I do.
Your musical background is really a great benefit. I never got to study music because I can't sing, which is why one of my books, I think it was my first one, is Singing in the Key of L. My parents would never give me music lessons because I'm tone deaf, but I taught myself guitar, and I played guitar, but I couldn't sing very well. And so I never got to. No, and I used to go sing in bars late at night in New Orleans anyway, and the bikers at 2 a.m. didn't care. They were so drunk they'd tip me anyway.
It's how the brain works. You can learn music and how to play an instrument without being able to reproduce tone in your voice, because it's a different section, or similar section but different part of your brain. Same thing with foreign languages. I cannot reproduce an accent, so whenever I try to speak Spanish,
not at all.
Horrible, just horrible.
Now that I'm good at. I do accents with my languages pretty well.
So it comes from a similar place, but not quite the same. And, I can hear and reproduce tone, but it can't hear and reproduce an accent. So it's, to me,
Interesting.
that's, the brain is a fascinating, fascinating organ.
Es muy interesante.
See.
You got that one. Very interesting. I wish I could have studied music. And it does show up in your other poems. For example, Rooster Blues, page 29. That's another form, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to, like get a list from you, and I'd love to start using some of these myself. I did do the American sentence quite a bit, and this one, what kind of form is this?
This is not one I've made up. This is a blues sonnet. So this one, and unlike, the one about the gee whiz element where I just imagined what it would be like to go out and grab fish for dinner when the bay drains. This one is a true story. This one really happened. We went to a very high society birthday party for a child, and they gave away chicks, newborn chicks, as party. And my kids were just overwhelmed by the idea that we wound up with chickens. But the high society people that were there, most of them were just friends of the restaurateur that was putting on the party, and they didn't quite realize that if you pick up a newborn chick, it's gonna move. And they were picking them up and dropping them and, like, I don't know, not treating them very carefully. So we were appalled, really. And we took home.
Did you wind up taking some home?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We took
and
home.
Growing chickens.
We took them home, and this poem is the story of what happened to them. We don't have to read them all. So I can tell you what happened to them if you want to move on.
Well, I want you to read this poem.
Okay, so then I won't tell you because it's in the poem. This is
Right.
Rooster Blues. The just hatched chicks were let loose as favors. Barely dry, they were let loose like favors. A flavicomus cloud dropped among toddlers. The birthday boy picked them up and held them. The party guests picked them up and crushed them. They forgot about the pet and petting farm. We gathered the chicks in a cowboy hat, collected chicks in the well of a straw hat, and took 4 of them home to make them fat. We shouldn't have named them after cousins. We learned never to name birds after cousins. Ben didn't make it. The others mashed him. The 3 grew an obod of combs, all roosters, and took to the stew pot our dream of brooders.
Oh. So what form is this poem?
This is a blues sonnet. So you see that the first two lines in each stanza of tercets is supposed to be very similar. And if you look at Jericho Brown's duplex, it takes a lot, it borrows a lot from the blues sonnet. It's kind of very.
So the the irony in this poem that all 3 of the ones you took home were males and no eggs.
Yeah.
So
once they hit 6 months and we were going to buy the hen hut, and we were going to be like, because we had an acre of land, nobody would have noticed if we had chickens, and there are chickens all around Miami, as we know.
Yes.
And then we were like, are those combs? What's going on here? And we realized that we were about to unleash on our neighborhood 3 roosters. So we don't really know what happened to them after we donated them to a farm. But I suspect, because you really can't have more than 1 rooster, or perhaps 2, because they are very, very aggressive and dominant, that they were probably eaten.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also, yeah, your neighbors, even on an acre, would hear at dawn the roosters crowing away.
Oh yeah, I don't think they would have appreciated that. And I don't think we would have enjoyed it either. So
No, no, especially on the days you want to sleep in.
Yeah.
That was an interesting poem. I really enjoyed that and the form of that as well. I was not familiar with the blue sonnet. Um, the other poem that had a very hard-hitting ending that really struck me is Elegy for a Gambler on page 30. Yeah, page 30. And that one also, your endings sort of are sucker punches. And this one hit me hard too. Do you want to read this one?
Sure. This one has footnotes. I won't read the footnotes, but I'll show you what it looks like so you can see. This is a prose poem, but I put footnotes in because it has just a couple of quotes and a couple of definitions. I wrote this for, I don't know if you remember Tiger Tail Productions when they were
Oh,
here.
yes, absolutely. I've been in their books.
Right. So one of the last things they did before they disbanded was to celebrate the casino, the Hialeah casino that
Oh,
came,
yeah.
I guess it underwent reconstruction. And when it reopened, we did a party there and had a bunch of, we put together an anthology to celebrate. So I
That's
wrote
neat.
this for that,
Interesting.
but it wound up being about my brother. It's funny how, you know, you start to write about one thing and what's really on your mind comes out. My brother loved
Right.
to gamble, and the only time he was really nice to me was when we were playing cards or gambling. And it only occurred to me as an adult that the reason why he was nice to me then was so he could take my money. And that's what this is about.
Sounds like brothers. I have 3.5 of them. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a lot of
Yep.
information about Hialeah in here. Hialeah is probably one of our more interesting historical places in Miami, where we just don't have that much history.
Yes.
Okay, elegy for a
Yes.
gambler. If it is true that the dead have all the glory of the world, then so too do the missing, the lost, the stolen, the runaways, the mentally absent, the Chrissy Houstons and Lamar Odoms found with lungs like water balloons, induced into comas with legal drugs. Only one of them lucky enough to survive the race back into a society that will no longer offer garlands of roses because we live in feelings, not in figures on a dial. Yet amber and silver alerts buzz our phones like low-lying planes with messages begging us to look, implore us to be witnesses, take note, as if in this particular age, we are actually more aware of the world around us rather than less, only glancing up from gadgets to avoid walking through glass and into door jambs or knocking our foreheads against the woodpecker splintered poles supporting these essential wires. But the first time the unheard of happens, no such warnings exist. So when the 50 flamingo chicks were snatched from Hialeah Park racetrack 1 July to be resold on the exotic pet market, a very profitable thing to be involved in if you're a thief. No rose or rouge or fuchsia alerts were delivered mobile to our inauthentic eyes and ears. No images of birds adorable with fuzz that stood out as if rubbed against rubber to create static electricity were sent for biometric identification. No, if you see this flamingo, please contact. And perhaps there won't be a next time for this flock who, like so many citizens of this portmanteau city, exilios of Cuba, have planted their genetic code in such uncertain urban earth, once considered by the natives a pretty prairie for generations now. When giving birth is the original gamble, keeping offspring from harm is merely a show parlay. Whatever one gets, they all get. But the thief, he is the first gambler, and he can take many forms: bird wrangler, horse track regular, poker player, brother. My brother taught me to gamble with pennies on the floor of the den where cave crickets exercised their moon landing legs the same year the Meadowlands racetrack was born, the year of his bar mitzvah, the year he quit Judaism, the year my parents brought home the Siberian husky pup he trained to attack and drag me down the stairs by my ankles, as if hauling a live crow through snowdrifts. Even though he cheated, always claiming the deal, labeling himself the house, I loved my brother enough back then to let him fleece me of my piggy bank savings, the way a farmer sticks his hand under a nesting hen for her eggs. I hardly squawked. Learning to play blackjack, Texas Hold'em, 7-card stud. These were my own diversionary tactics. Of course, they didn't work in the long term. A wager never does pay off that way. For those of us who give too much, there will always be recipients who want nothing in the end. The shared account, bloated by the drop and release of rich, deliberate coins, waits. This time, when the alert sounds, it's in code, a terse range of monophonic blues that calls all our bets and never again allows for a raise.
I really love this poem.
Oh.
But I asked you to read it because of the footnotes, and I wanted you to talk about that so that our listeners might understand, why you would use them, and is it advisable to use them, and what does an editor think of them, etc.
The footnotes I used instead of notes at the back, because I used there are a couple of quotes in here from Philip James Bailey. We live in deeds, not in years, in thoughts nor breaths is one. And I cut that up into 2 parts. And then there's a quote from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And then the words pretty and prairie is the translation of Hialeah, which comes from the Muskogee word, which I probably am pronouncing it correctly, Hayakpo. Because I wanted it to be on the same page as the poem, rather than in the back of the book, because I think it was important to acknowledge. So as an editor myself, I sometimes get poems with footnotes, and sometimes the footnotes are actually part of the poem. They have poetic language. This one doesn't have poetic language, but I find the way poets use footnotes, every time it's different, and I always find it very interesting. And we have published poems with footnotes before at Swim every day. And sometimes I get poems that don't work. They use footnotes that don't work. And sometimes we get them and I'm like utterly fascinated by them. So I'm always of the opinion, if you're going to experiment with something, go for it wholeheartedly. If you're going to invent a poem, do it. If you're going to use footnotes, try it, like go for it. Don't be like, oh, this probably won't work, but I wanted you to see it anyway. Nope. Send it to me. I'd love to see it. An experiment can fail, but failure is part of growth and failure is part of being a poet. So I always like to see something new and different.
I usually just use one and star, and then I use the star at the bottom to explain, like I was writing something about Dragonfly Galaxy, and most people wouldn't know what that was. I just used Dragonfly, so I did explain it at the bottom with just a starred entry. But yeah, this one was really interesting, and I remember the flamingos at that racetrack. I was there one time. When I first moved here in the 70s. Yeah. It was famous for that flock.
Famous for it.
Very famous.
And you can watch them take off every sunset still. They're still there. They take off and they come back. And to me, it's kind of fascinating how much they are like homing birds. They're homing pigeons. And they really don't migrate.
I thought the racetrack closed.
This was like a couple of years ago that I saw them last. So I don't know. I think it's still open. I don't know. Don't talk to me on that. I'd have to check.
Yeah, I thought it closed, but I may be wrong.
No, I'd have to.
Okay.
We're both
Yeah,
like,
no, I was.
trust me, I don't know. I'd have
We're getting to that age where, is that a real memory or is that Memorex?
Which,
And most people wouldn't even remember. Yeah,
you'd have to footnote that.
right. Because today people would know what Memorex, what we meant by that. Very interesting. This whole new generation, there's just so many things they don't have any um, reference to or knowledge of. They just look at you blankly. Like I'm teaching freshman English at Broward College, and
Yeah.
I'll say something. I can tell by their faces they're just completely blank. Doesn't register. They have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but
So,
I also find it
and I'm,
fascinating how much they like vintage stuff. So
yeah,
at the same time, they're willing to learn about it. And they find retro and going back to analog things pretty cool. So they might actually like Memorex and
yeah. I'm
the
always tempted to put up YouTube or look it up on screen so they can see what
yeah.
I'm talking about. But we don't have a whole lot of time to do that. So I have to resist the temptation. The next one I want you to read, which I thought was just super interesting because it was vague to me. It was so metaphorical. I regret eating freedom for breakfast, page
Oh.
45. And I just love I just love the idea in that poem. But I tend to write in pencil when I'm reading a poetry book. I check a poem I like, I double check it if I'm like in love with it. And then I write little notes on it, rhetorical questions. So this one I wrote, so metaphoric, purposely vague, wonderful. So
I will tell you the
read this.
backstory. Okay, I'll read it
Yeah.
and then I'll tell you the backstory.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more fun to learn the story afterwards.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I regret eating freedom. This is a running title, so I'll just go right into it. I regret eating freedom for breakfast because it only made me hungrier for lunch. And by dinner time, I had no more left to serve. The children had to go without, so I sent them to their beds, telling them they should be grateful. They still had the inarguable rule of sleep, but they just showed me the snarls they usually keep in their thoughts. Despite the circadian restriction of darkness, I heard them kicking the cardboard headboards of would-be dreams, casting rashes of spells against the bunting that held them close, ticking off the ingredients to sovereignty they would begin to gather the next day in the first of many attempts to outgrow me.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the backstory on this.
Yeah. Okay. So the title comes from one of my students. He was a sixth grader and he was a really quirky kid, as most of my students were very, very quirky. Because I taught in an art school, so creative writing was their major. These are sixth graders, seventh graders, eighth graders who wanted to be writers when they grew up. So you can imagine what they were like at 11. And he comes in first thing in the morning, Miss K, I regret eating freedom for breakfast. And I was like, okay, oh, that's gotta be a poem. And that's what came out of it. I showed it to him after, and he was like, this is great, I love it. I'm sure he had no idea what it meant because I'm not even sure what I know what it means. Well, I do know what it means. This time, like when I was teaching, I started teaching at that art school when my kids were in third grade and sixth grade. And I left when my son was a senior in high school so I could enjoy his senior year. I didn't get to enjoy my daughter's senior year. So my kids literally grew up when I was teaching other kids. And it's really about my kids leaving the nest.
Yeah. Yeah, which is always a
angst and how we didn't always get along.
Right, right. mixture of relief and trepidation and
Yeah.
worry.
Yeah.
I
And
have the same
enjoy,
problem.
enjoy, like, yay, they're gone. They're grown up. They're launched.
Yes, yes. Yep. That hasn't happened for me yet. And he's going to be 30. That's a whole, I've begun to consider myself not a enabler, but an investor.
Yeah.
I'm,
I
I'm
think,
his major.
there's always worry, and you can't get around that. And there's always a dependency. I still call my parents when something happens. My dad's 90, my mom's 85.
Wow.
You're never gonna be, there's no, there's no real freedom from your children. You shouldn't have to feel like that
No.
unless you're
Yeah.
estranged. And I don't want to be estranged from my children. I love that they love to call me and tell me about stuff. And I like that I
Yeah.
want my parents, for a while when I left my home, my childhood home, I felt like I didn't need to call them and tell them about things. Now that I'm older, I feel closer to them. So I think there's that thread that
Yeah.
ties no matter what.
It's like once you have children, you start appreciating your parents a whole lot more than you did when you left.
For sure.
Yeah.
Especially if
And
you
you're
have,
so lucky to have them to call still. I'm an orphan, you feel after they're gone, you think, oh, no matter how old you are, you think, oh my God, I'm an orphan now. And there's such a sense of loss with that.
yeah.
And my parents died long ago. And I still, feel, I talk to them constantly, though they're on my patio in pots. So my dad's an aloe because he's always there to help me. My mom is bromeliad because she's always a little odd. And even my grandmother, I don't even know what that plant is, but it was hers. And so it grows like crazy and she's in there. And my mother's dog is in with my mother. So I have a whole family out on my patio that I talk to all the time.
But I
And I'm
really enjoy that idea. John and I want to be trees, so I don't find that odd at all, actually.
Yeah, no, I told my grandson, I want to be an aloe too. So I'm always there to give you a hand if you burn yourself or, something's wrong, you can go to me still. So, yep. And it's portable. So wherever they move, they can take me with
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that they don't ever have to go visit some place. So let's move on to something. Well, on that same topic, I sit Shiva for the village that raised me. No, actually, I like yard work because the form of that works so well with the poem. So yard work is page 38.
Yard work. Okay.
Yeah, that one is one of my absolute favorites. It's got a double check.
Oh, a double check. I'm honored.
Double check.
This one is about my nephew. After my brother passed away and we hadn't been speaking for several years, my adult nephew, my young adult nephew, came to live with me because he wanted to get to know me. And he was unsure what had happened between me and my brother. And he was willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, which was really unusual. And then his
Yeah.
sister followed suit and went to medical school down in Miami. And it was a really nice way for me to get to know my niece and nephew who had been kept from me. So this
For the
poem,
longest time. Yeah.
yard work. To mow the lawn, his only chore, he propped open his bedroom window with his stereo speakers, set the arm so the vinyl would repeat, and turned the volume louder than the sputter of gas chewing overgrown New Jersey grass. When Meatloaf screamed about a bat out of hell, the whole neighborhood knew my brother's allowance was being withheld, or he was about to get the belt. My sister and I used the clippers to trim the curbed edges, even though we also dusted, vacuumed, cooked, and did the dishes, complaining about unfair divisions of labor one week to the dark side of the moon, the next to the grand illusion we're born to run. We were never allowed to choose the tunes. My sister grew up to go to Springsteen concerts with him. I was the one who would truly run from the Northeast, first to the daily warmth and minty evening breath of Southern California, then to Miami, moist mouth of the world, where grass doesn't grow under the mango trees that throw so much shade there isn't enough sun for such small blades, and where my brother never came to visit, preferring the green he grew in Greenwich and on Wall Street. After he died, his son found a job in South Florida and came to live with us for a time, learning the names and provenance of this fruit, how to tell the differences between a Carrie and a Beverly, between the mango that is not yet ready to be picked and the one that will be cast out on the driveway overnight if it is not, and how to eat a freshly caught Hayden over the garbage can or sink to save his suit. He volunteered to gather them, bringing in armloads like firewood, wandering around the archy lawn as if it were a bocce ball, one ear tuned to the buried beat of the tropics, the other still turned inward, an antenna vibrating with the silence his father left behind.
Oh, yeah, I love this poem. I think the couplets, your choice of using couplets for this poem works so well with the meat of the poem. Brilliant, brilliant choice, really was. I personally love to hear backstories of poems. I know a lot of poets just plow through their poems, never saying a word about them. And I don't know. When I read a book of poetry and then I go to hear the poet, I not only hear the voice in my head when I'm reading it later, but I'm hearing the stories and it means so much more to me. So for me, doing these kinds of interviews and hearing a poet talk about their work really just enhances for me the whole experience. So I thank you for telling that story. There was another poem and we don't have a lot of time left. There was another one that I really liked. Well, I usually don't have people read long poems. The one prose poem, it read more like a story. But page 60, the antonomasia.
Oh,
I'd never heard that word. I had to look that one up. It's just so interesting. And the whole idea of what you did in this poem, it's ekphrastic, it stands on its own, but it made me want to go look it up. And Hieronymus Bosch is one of my favorite painters. And I actually saw his one of his famous triptychs in Madrid at the Prado.
oh.
And you want to just pull up a chair and sit there for an hour, just looking at all the things in the poem, in the painting. And
Yeah.
I felt the same way with your poem. And I have notes written all over it because I had to look up a lot of words. And I really loved the words that you used and why you used them, because it relates to the paintings and the topics. But this was, to me, it sounded like a story in Chaucer, the way you told it and the way the painting evolves. It was kind of like one of Chaucer's tales. And so I love this poem. So read this poem.
I will, but I will also tell you
this
that
one has
I a lot of stuff too when I was writing it, because if you know anything about Bosch's work, you know that his stuff is so incredibly complex and it's just filled with an enormous amount of backstory itself. So don't feel like
that's why you can
look it up because I also looked it up. I was like, what does all this mean?
Yeah.
And
Well, when I write poems, I look stuff up too. I wrote a whole book of poems called Alphalexia of just define. I don't know. They were meditations on the letter of the alphabet. So there are 26 poems. Each one's a meditation on a letter of the alphabet. And I was in the dictionary.
yeah.
I just got lost in the dictionary.
I mean,
And sometimes I even wrote a poem once. What if you read the dictionary like a novel?
yes.
You know, would it have a beginning, a middle, and end? So I looked up the exact middle of the dictionary for the middle for the word. And yeah, I've been doing that since I was 17. Look, just getting lost in the dictionary.
Yeah, I think there's
So yeah,
those
that's
who write and then just pretend that they knew all this stuff already. It's like, you didn't really though, did you?
yeah. No. Well, that's what writers do.
Yeah, we all do
You know.
research. So
Yeah,
okay, I'll
or
read the
research.
poem. This is after Concert in the Egg, which is probably his most famous piece, I guess. But there are a couple of others that are also famous.
Yeah, the one I saw was a triptych.
Yeah.
And,
Well, he did a lot of those. But this, I guess, is one of his more famous reproduced pieces that you can see without going to visit. But it's filled with things, Okay.
It is.
Antonomasia. Never mind the snake hanging like a stale piece of licorice over a pinky of branch. He's not so seductive after all. And though trees root here and myths teem like gods, this pessimistic impasto is hardly a garden. Never mind the choir of goliards chanting from a common score inside the cracked amphitheater of an egg. They wear the foundations of birds and buildings on their heads, as if brains are fertilized yolks, sprouting the concrete. Never mind the roasted chicken aloft in the wicker, the grilled fish, the hand reaching for it, the other hand cutting away from the monk, the string attached to his tithed purse. Never mind the cat contemplating all this delicious theft. Some appetites are better left unexplored. Still, music can turn men into animals and back again, it seems. The lute player wears the head of a donkey with no apparent discomfort as he plucks and strums. A monkey chews on a horn. Can he evolve? Upright inside the egg, a yokel fingers a harp, another a penny whistle. The conductor spears a baton like a lightning ray. Spire on a cathedral, a direct line to strike you down morality. Never mind him, no one else is. Nor is anyone paying attention to the tiny men of conscience in the corner, busily working overtime, forging nightmares. And never mind the turtle. No, really, never mind the turtle, as he makes his tortured way across the panel. He is a lowly whole note that has escaped the sheet music, the staffs that prove the artist died before these lead tin yellows and madder lakes tipped the hand-glued sable of any brush. Never mind, never mind. Take this alchemy into your mouth like a vitamin and hum it. On the palate, the building blocks of creation crumble into acrid aftertaste.
I just love this. And like I said, it made me look up the painting. And I must have spent at least a half an hour looking at that painting and seeing what you wrote and just thinking, yeah, she's right on there. I love the Goliards.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a word, I had to look up Goliards, but I saw them afresh. Yeah, that's what reminded me of Chaucer. It was just terrific.
Well, when I was looking up this painting, I read a lot of art criticism of it. And there's a big discussion about whether or not he finished this painting himself.
Oh, really?
And that's the latter half of it. That's why the latter half is about whether those yellows were actually in use at the time of his work. So there's some question about whether or not this is his work. which
Interesting.
that really fascinated me because, you know, there's always a question of authenticity, and, you know, Shakespeare's always been like doubted and questioned, and so this piece in particular, which happens to be one of his more well-known, there's this big question of, did he actually finish it before he died?
Very interesting. Did they have an idea of who might have? Did he have an apprentice?
He had students, but there's like the people who have analyzed it truly believe that these couple of yellows that are in the painting were not in use at the time. They didn't exist when he existed. So, but you know, you can always get somebody who touched up something later. So it's almost impossible
Yeah.
to before.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. That could happen. Yeah. This one, you know, reminds me of Dali. I love surrealism. He was earlier than Dali.
Yeah.
Just amazing. Amazing. Did we already read your favorite poem in the book?
I don't know if I marked my favorite. Do I have a favorite? I have a couple of favorites. I guess. One of my favorites is really about my kids growing up and leaving, and me leaving the mango house. So I guess we didn't read that one. Where is that one?
Which one is that?
Oh, yeah, here it is. It's called It's Not About the Dog. But it's about the dog, but not really about the dog. That's one of my favorites.
What page?
One of the reasons.
What page?
It's page
what
70.
Page?
79.
70?
79.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
One of the reasons it's my favorite also is because we had not just the chickens, but we had, when we lived there, over the course of time, we had like 13 cats. We had dogs. We had a fox. We had fish don't count, but we had a number of animals, most of them that lived until, a couple of rabbits. We had a lot of rescued animals that I would, you know, nurture and then give away or place. And this one is about one of my actual dogs that lived out her natural life and passed away before we moved, or at least it starts off that way. Yep. So it's about the dog, but not really about the dog, which is why I continue to cry at odd moments, popping up in my day like advertisements on social media several weeks after we found her dead in her crate, a cold log of dachshund. The other two dogs who had slept there with her for 14 years, eager to scramble out and pee on the fallen toast of palm fronds outside, come back in to crunch kibble and take another nap, do all the normal dog things that they do, as if they didn't notice anything wrong. It's about how they knew, having curled around her body, sinking into that foreign place all night, but also about how they didn't really know or want to understand, how they look up at me now every time I walk in the door, my arms empty of her, then settle their heads on their paws with a single mutual sigh, and give her plot on the cushion the girth of a large belt. Or it's about how I project these feelings onto them, the loss, the space, the childhood she held in her comedian's body of both of my kids, and the length of time we lived in this house that we can now clean of her final traces to put on the market for a family with babies and different kinds of pets, who want an acre of yard with too many mango trees and scenery that Facebook identifies as India instead of Miami. It's about the mangoes, which the dachshund scavenged for only one season and inexplicably never ate again, but also not really about the mangoes, which I don't have energy to gather anymore. She preferred the half-rotten avocados anyway, sneaking over to the pair of trees marking the property line by the fence every time I let all 3 dogs out at night, coming back with the mottled shell of fruit in her snout, or the sugary sapodillas, brown as rats, rooting like a pig brush as if for truffles. It's about this nest, but really also not about this nest, emptying, though not vacant yet, built by a raptor, though I am now a sparrow, or whatever kind of bird a bird of prey hunts. But oh, how I recall that raptor, how I still want to eagle the sky and look down on the world the way I did when I felt it owed me something enormous that I didn't have to earn or catalog or think about the day I would have to downsize it away.
Yeah. Well, that comes through so well, the nostalgia and the love and the
Thank you.
conflict. It's just a beautiful poem. Yeah, I think I would. If I wrote that, I think that would be one of my favorites. I had a dog that had cancer and I was going to put it down the next day. The day before, I saw my cat outside in the backyard of the screen enclosure sitting and howling. The cat was howling. And I was getting ready for work and I had a big meeting that I had to do a presentation for. It was 7:30 in the morning. I go out to see why the cat is howling. And the dog had gone out the doggy door and died on her own right there in the yard the day before I was going to have her put down. So forever after, anytime, like my grandmother did that, she just died very gently. And we called it, she did a honey, because the dog's name was Honey.
Yeah.
And she just very quietly just did it on her own and spared me the guilt of having had to do it. And so when you have animals, you know, you kind of do have to get used to their goings and comings and goings. And I have a fox too, but she comes, well, they only come around, I think spring, winter and spring is there, because I feed a feral cat in front of my house now. I used to feed her various places, but now it's right on my front porch. And the foxes come and eat the cat food, and the possums come and eat the cat food, and the raccoons come, because I have a camera out there to be sure it was the cat. And I discovered all these other little creatures that I'm feeding.
If around
Unintentional.
cat food, the peacocks will eat the cat food.
Well, I'm glad I don't attract those.
Yeah, you'd know
horrible
because they would keep something in their place, usually just a feather, but sometimes, you know, a little bird poop. And they're
the raccoons and possums leave little treasures as well. Yeah. But yeah, it's fascinating to watch. I had 3 raccoons come one time. It's fascinating to watch them on the camera. And I used to have a little house I bought for the cat right out there. And you could watch them going in and out of the house. It was really interesting. I still feed that. I can't even remember how many years now I've been feeding this feral cat. And no one else in the neighborhood feeds her. She lives underneath a trailer across the street, police trailer. And I think it's at least 6, 7 years now. I wish I could remember. But she lets me pet her, but I can't pick her up. So the last poem I want you to read, I think we've gone a little over time, but that's okay. The last poem is the last poem in the book, Berkat Habiat, A Woman is a Bird When. I really like that poem too, and I thought that was really a good one to end the book. And I noticed that in this book, there's no matter after this poem. Sometimes the last poem in the book has more stuff like about the author, different things, acknowledgments. And this one just is blank page after. And I wondered, actually, it's, yeah, blank page on the cover, if that was deliberate because of the content of the poem. So read the poem first.
Berkata Bayat, a woman is a bird when, and this is a running title into a villanelle, just so you know. Okay. And it's also an acrostic poem. So it's After Empowered Women by Tomas Valdeviso Valto. This was actually an assignment I was given to write about this particular painting. And I liked it. I really liked the painting. It was a very interesting piece. So this is what came out. A woman is a bird when, wood under feet, dressed in flower parts, she surveys her private garden, ragtag, everything in it equal to her heart. Downsize, they tell her, it's only a start. Learn to bolster what's beginning to sag. Wood under feet, dressed in flower parts. A woman is a thorn, poisonous dart. Planes fly away from the kite of her back, everything in them equal to her heart. Convertibles, accordion, roofs hard. Oh, to feel again the pain of the egg. Wood under feet, dressed in flower parts. A woman goes rogue, winging wide apart. Her flock caught in a current of jet lag. Everything in it equal to her heart. One eye doll wide, one squinting and alert. She talons her home like a prized handbag. Wood under feet, dressed in flower parts. Everything in it equal to her heart.
Wow. So this is, you said it was a villanelle?
Yes.
Oh, a villanelle, right. You said villanelle and I'm thinking Sistina. I don't know why. Yes, villanelle.
Sistina's in here, or at least one Sistina in here.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
There's a lot of villanelles and evaporating villanelles, and I chose to end it with this poem because it's, although this is largely about living on Mango Grove, living in Mango House, and learning how to leave what I had loved. This last poem is the first poem I wrote in my new house. And I wrote it right after we moved in, surrounded by boxes, because it, like I said, it was an assignment. So I had to do it at a table that had just been delivered and was like covered in brown paper. And that's what came out, like this leaving the nest stuff that really echoes throughout the whole book. So it's kind of, at that whole theme, I guess that you had said before, that it's just a bittersweet time of life that you can't really dictate what's going to happen. And you just hope that your kids learn how to launch themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's always the hope.
Yeah.
It doesn't always happen.
But you can't help it.
I didn't realize this was a painting. I thought it was after a poem. So I hadn't looked up the painting. So I'm gonna have to do that now.
Yeah,
but interesting. I also thought, even though it was about leavings, I also kind of had the feeling of beginnings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's, I mean, I can't deny that there's a certain joy and freedom in being an empty nester now.
Did you downsize your house? They can't come home again?
And then COVID hit, and then the pandemic hit, and they did come home, and I was like, uh-oh, there's no room for you. Uh-oh.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think about it.
That hadn't happened yet, so I didn't have those complicated feelings yet. This was, you're going to leave, you're all off in college and grad school, and I'm going to be here alone, and maybe it's going to be great. And maybe it's not, but we can all look forward to like moving on, I guess. And then the pandemic hit, and we were all trapped in this smaller house together, and we were like, oh no, we're all on top of each other.
Oh no, how'd you survive that? Yeah. Did you play games?
Did we
Or
play?
did everybody just hibernate?
Actually, we played like Cards Against Humanity and a couple of those kinds of games because my kids have great senses of humor. And my son was so bored, he took a bartending course just on his own, like made drinks for us every night. And it was great, actually.
Nice. Yeah. I did new recipes. I was just searching and cooking. I have the stack now of recipes that I printed off during the COVID to try something
Sure.
new with chicken
Yeah.
just about every night because
Mhm.
they won't eat fish. So chicken, 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 chicken.
Yeah, both my
And
kids.
lots of ways to make chicken.
Yeah, so everybody took their turns cooking, and they all have a different cooking sensibility, which is very kind of cool. So they cooked, my husband cooked. I was not the official cook, which I haven't been since I went back to teaching. Because I have
Nice.
so many different jobs, I never really became the family cook again after I was like teaching, still doing food journalism, the creative stuff. I was like, I quit, and I never really cooked again. We would have our family dinners at restaurants that I had to review.
Ah, I've been cooking since I'm 9, and I'm still doing the cooking.
Yeah,
So
no, my
they
sister and
just
I,
don't seem.
we were always cooking, always cooking.
Yeah,
Um, but,
yeah.
but I officially put in my notice. I was like, if I'm going to be working full time and half time and taking them to all their activities and doing all this, no more cooking.
Somebody else has to do the cooking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't seem to impress them enough to do that. They don't seem to care about food that much. Um, okay, well, I can't tell you what a joy this has been. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you would like to say?
I'd like to say a great big thank you to you. This was a joy for me too. Um, Come out to the book fair. There's a great roster of poets this year, including one of
Yeah.
the teachers from Tufts. Marie Howe is going to be there. So
Oh, Marie Howe. Yeah, she's great.
she's great.
The book fair was one of my favorite places to be. Um, I've been there since the very first, and we used to have a booth there, a table, the South Florida Poetry Institute. We used to have cookies, meringue cookies with poems in them that
Oh,
we would,
what a
yeah,
great.
my friend Maggie, dear Maggie, departed Maggie, she used to make them. And she would, because a meringue, you don't cook, so you just put the piece of paper in the mush. And when it dries up, it's in there. And like a fortune cookie. And it was really fun. Just a line of poetry would go in there.
Good idea.
And yeah, that was really a cool thing. And yeah, since the very first one. And my favorite thing to do was to watch the Remainders, the Rock Bottom Remainders band. I don't know that they perform anymore, do they? I don't think so.
Remember
That
seeing them.
was Dave Barry, Amy Tan. Yeah, they were terrific.
Yeah.
But
I remember seeing
yeah,
them.
I'm gonna.
I mean, it's always fun, no matter what
It is.
iteration it is and what's going on and who's there. But this year I know because we publish a poem every day on Swim. We partner with the book fair, and whatever female poets are coming to the book fair, 2 weeks or 3 weeks in advance of the book fair, we get all the female poets doing a video of themselves reading a poem that they're going to read at the fair and publish it on Swim. So I know the
Oh, great! That's a great idea. I didn't notice that last year.
Yeah, last year
Oh,
we did it
that's
in the afternoon because we were partnering with 305 Coffee Cafecito. But this year we're just going to do it as our poem of the day. So I know that there's a terrific roster of female poets coming.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
South Florida Poetry
thank
Jam
you.
has always been a great partner with the book fair. Swim partners with the book fair. We all know each other. We're like, South Florida.
Yes, yeah.
It's all very close.
It's been a very sweet pleasure reading about mangoes, your family. Oh, the other question, last question. You write a lot about your family. how do they feel about that?
Some of them probably don't know. I doubt my nephew knows that there's a poem about him in this book, because now we're estranged, which is very ironic. Sort of followed in my brother's path.
Yeah.
My sister, when I write about my sister, she doesn't mind as long as I'm not telling any of her secrets, but I don't. My parents don't really love when I write about them. That was a conversation I had with my mother many years ago, that, she was fine with me being a poet and writer. She really loves it. I think she wanted to be one herself. But as long as I didn't tell the family secrets. And it's really interesting because, when my brother passed away, they knew that I was going to be writing about him. He was kind of cruel to them at the end as well. I'm not convinced a lot of this was all of his personality and not some disease coming into it. They seem okay with that, but there's a lot of stuff I haven't written about and probably won't until certain people are gone, just out of respect. So you'll notice that there's not anything really cruel. I never have written something about someone who's here that's mean or revelatory, just because they have asked me not to.
Yeah, that's always very tricky. I've written about people, but I know they're never going to read it because they just don't read my poems. My daughter in particular, I have a few about her she wouldn't be too thrilled with. But, I sent her a book, but I know she's never read it. And yeah, but people sometimes do. The only one my mother used to say my poems made her sad, so she never read them, ever since childhood even. And the only one who truly loved my poems was my last husband, but he never really understood them, but he loved that I wrote about him. So when he died and I wrote these 18 sonnets about him, I just knew that he would have loved that. And they weren't very complimentary, all of them, but I knew he would have loved that I had written them. Yeah. So that was, kind of interesting. Okay, well, I thank you for sharing with us, and I guess we're signing off.
Thank you so much. It was great, and it's such a pleasure, as always, to speak with you.
Thank you.